Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Terminal Island, Lost Communities on America's Edge. And thank you all for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage in the beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love to hold our programs here. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. It's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar. It's not a webinar, it's an in-person program. We are recording it. I'm so used to saying webinar. Okay, so for those of you that might be new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The Book Club publishes limited edition, finely made books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions, like the one this evening, on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the book club. You can also talk to me after the program this evening. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Terminal Island, Lost Communities on America's Edge is the title of the program, and our speaker is author Naomi Hirahara. Naomi Hirahara is a multi-award winning author and journalist who was born and raised here in Pasadena, California. She received her bachelor's degree in international relations from Stanford University and studied at the Inter-University Center for Advanced Japanese Language Studies in Tokyo. She was a reporter and editor of the refuge during the culmination of the redress and reparations movement for Japanese Americans who were forcibly removed from their homes during World War II. She is the author and or editor of several books, including Green Makers, Japanese American Gardeners in Southern California, and A Scent of Flowers, The History of the Southern California Flower Market, among many others. She is also a celebrated author of many mysteries and short stories, and some of you might know her from that book. Now tonight, Naomi will talk about her latest book, co-written with Geraldine Nance, titled Terminal Island, Lost Communities on America's Edge. Terminal Island tells the story of the birth, flourishing, and ultimate destruction of this vibrant community in Los Angeles Harbor. I have a long introduction here, and I'm not going to read it all because you're going to talk about everything that I have written here. So we're just going to...
Can I borrow that?
I don't think you need this. So we're just going to cut to tonight. What we are going to be sharing with you is the story of this beloved place through its various incarnations, ending with its ultimate destruction at the hands of the U.S. government. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please hold them until the end of the presentation. We will have time for questions, and we'll take them at the end. I'll come back up for a Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Naomi Hirahara.
Is it okay if I stand right here?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the video. Okay. I'm kind of allergic to podiums, so as you can see, I'm vertically challenged, so I want you to see, you know, not just like a floating head right here. I want to first ask, does anybody here have a direct connection to Terminal Island? Okay, just checking. Some audiences I speak to, you know, like in Gardena, we had a day of remembrance, and there were hundreds of people there, and about half of the group had ties to Terminal Island. So how many people have gone over there to Terminal Island? Okay, great. So Yeah, this particular book, I want to tell you how I got involved in it, because as you have learned, I'm a native Pasadenan, and I currently live in Pasadena too, so I'm, a total dyed-in-the-wool Pasadenan right now. I've been and lived in other places. But so how my involvement, this project was initiated by Geraldine Nance, who's the co-writer, and at the time she was the port director. And so the focus was supposed to be all on the Japanese fishing village, which started about 1917, and I'm going to be talking more about it. But Geraldine is also a historian, and she dug out this incredible history prior, like going back to the 1800s. So they pulled me in because I had worked for the refuge newspaper, and I had done a lot of history books. But then we just realized that we wanted to kind of handle the entirety of the history of this area. And so Geraldine is more an expert in the early years, so I'm going to do the best I can to share that portion with you. So this is present day Terminal Island, and this area, it's like the confluence of commerce, of wanderers, and intervention from the government. So it's a fascinating place, and it's also largely a man-made place. So the area that's kind of on the south side, this kind of weirdly shaped area is Terminal Island, and you can access it from 2 bridges. And let's see, just to give you a sense of this area and how much it's changed. This is an early image from the 1900s, early 1900s. So there was this dead man's island. There was also a rattlesnake island on the south part. And so people, like eccentric people, would wander over there, and even though there was no running water, they would just like squat there and create, this was their home. And it was just, and children would come and play there. And what they did was they created a jetty, and this whole area too, it's very interesting how many entities wanted to take control of it. It was like San Pedro, it was Long Beach, and then finally it became under the city of Los Angeles. So the city decided to create like a jetty so that boats and ships could travel into, and they could further grow the port. So that's how it first developed. And then you could see there was a Brighton Beach, where very wealthy people had like a summer home, and the reason why it was called Terminal, not because it's like the end, not a very ominous reason, but because of the railroad that was connected. It was a terminal, and so as a result of that connection, it really opened up possibilities for the port. Now, we all hear about squatters, right, today, but squatters have been with us since the beginning of time, the beginning of Los Angeles. The squatter, so there was a number of people from actually this side of town, from the Arroyo, that decided that they wanted beachfront retreat area, and one of them was Charles Lummis. So this is, and Geraldine did some wonderful research. She found a lot of ephemeral, and she found this map that Lummis had created for his little beachfront property. And one kind of, you can't really see it that well, but the toilet, was like the same place where fishing was taking place. So it just goes straight into the water. And again, you know, as you all know, and I just heard about your project, right? Elizabeth Pomeroy was telling me that you are going to be publishing a memoir of a woman who rode through Yosemite on horseback. And this story, too, in the very beginning, involved a lot of enterprising women and women of the arts. And so this portion of the story I could relate to. So this woman from the Arroyo, Ida Strobridge, she was an author, she was a bookbinder. You know, another thing, you know, self-publishing is a topic that people talk all the time, but again, you know, from the beginning of LA, this is nothing new. And she was a squatter. She joined, you know, this arts community, and they even had this women's retreat called the Wiki Up. So, and then I believe Geraldine found these examples of her original bookbinding, I think at Huntington. Another one of these artists was a photographer named Oliver Percival, and as you can see on the cover, it's that cyanotype. I don't know how many, I'm imagining you all are familiar with this kind of processing of photos. So it's, again, from the end of, like, we're talking about, you know, manipulating digital images, but, you know, these photographers were starting to do that, you know, maybe with chemicals and not computers, but they wanted to experiment with colors. And this is Oliver Percival's work. And she also lived in the Arroyo. Did I mispronounce her name? Olive, okay. Olive Percival. And you all know her, yeah. Okay, and then another fascinating thing was the University of California had established a laboratory here in Terminal Island. And it didn't last that long, and it eventually was moved to San Diego and became Scripps. So this is Geraldine's headline, yeah, the big fish that got away. But there were also a lot of women scientists that were integral and an important part of this laboratory. And here, you know, this project, to tell you quite honestly, was a miracle. You know, because we had a very limited time to make this happen, and I'm not at liberty to share all the reasons why, but you know, but we also on the cover it mentions Eric Linksweiler. I don't know if you all know that he's very active with the Neon Museum, and he's the guy with the pickup truck who people call him, they're going to get rid of this neon sign, and he goes with his pickup truck to pick it up. But he also is a photo editor, and we found these wonderful collections in all sorts of places. And we were delighted to get these pictures of like wealthy vacationers who had a beach house in this area, and this is a really fun one, just showing life for these individuals. This was a boarding house. I think this is Geraldine's one of her favorite photos in it. And this was around until the 40s. So it had a long history on the island. Okay, so the squatters, so, you know, the city of LA, they wanted to do things, you know, and they saw the potential of the port. They also wanted to increase commerce there, and there was there were starting to be canneries on the San Pedro side, and they saw the potential because tuna that was starting to get popular as something that Americans would eat. Sardine fishing was already established, so but then you have a bunch of squatters, right? So this, I think this was from 1912, I believe. It was early on, and anyway, so what they had to do, it was called East San Pedro at the time. So the city had to they had to map out, like, who were these squatters? So it was kind of wonderful because in a way we have a census of who actually lived there. And so they were, so the city was starting to dredge, and as they were dredging, the land was starting to fall in. So even if these squatters decided to stay, I mean, they were informed they had to leave. A lot of things that they had built on stilts were starting to fall into the ocean anyway. Okay, so now we jump to 1940s, and this is how Terminal Island looks in 1940. What I focused on in my section was the area called Fish Harbor, and that's where all the canneries moved in, Starkist and many others. You can also see on the map there's a federal prison that still is there. When I did my presentation in Gardena, someone who worked at the prison, they offered to give me a tour. And you know, I'm a mystery writer, so I was very excited and planning to go. But there was an immigration station right next to the federal prison for you to get an idea. You can also see on the map, it says the town of Terminal. So there was another community called Terminal, which was more interracial. The cannery, Fish Harbor, was probably 99% people of Japanese ancestry, and cumulatively there were at least 3,000 Japanese Americans living in that area. This is I believe this is 1917, and this was a business by a man named Yamamoto. So just to give you the story, how did Japanese Americans happen to come to Fish Harbor? There were some early people who were fishing abalone, more in the White Point area, and there were also Japanese immigrants who were working on the railroad. There were some who fished across the way in San Pedro, and many of these individuals were from the prefecture of Wakayama in Japan. And Wakayama is a coastal town. So these men, they brought this type of fishing. They would fish with long bamboo poles. It's called chumming, and they would use a barbless hook, and they would release live bait into the ocean. They'd be on boats, and they would put their line into the water. These huge tunas, they weigh, many pounds, would come for the bait, and then they would be caught in this barbless hook. And then these men, would gracefully, there's footage at the Japanese American Museum, they would just whip their wrists back, and this huge tuna would come, land on the deck of the boat. So this type of technique was new. There were many other people that were fishing. There were Italians, there were Yugoslavians. They were primarily using nets, and that was fine for things like sardines. But when you use a net to catch like a big fish like tuna, the flesh would get bruised. So these canneries, they saw what the Japanese were doing. They go, we want what they're doing. So they were hired by the canneries to go fish, and each fisherman was assigned to a different cannery. And they would go out and fish different kinds of species for these corporations. So I was really familiar with Terminal Islanders when I worked at the Rafushimpo newspaper. Even though the island was closed after World War II, there's a group called the Terminal Islanders. They would always have a New Year, kind of a New Year's party, not, like in January, which they still continue to, and they also have picnics in June. And when I went to my first Terminal Islander event, they were so refreshing. So much humor, fun, kind of sometimes rough language. And so I just thought, wow, these fishermen, there's just something else, And so I think I had a little bit of a stereotype of what, the Terminal Islanders were. But when I was doing this book, I learned that this group of fishermen, rough and tumble, they were incredibly strategic and they were very political. And this individual, Kihei Nasu, the gentleman with his family, he was from Japan. He was not from Wakayama. He was not a fisherman. But in the early 1900s, when the California Senator Phelan, he was really targeting the Japanese. He wanted them out of California, and a lot of forces wanted Japanese out of fishing. And so the Terminal Islanders, they understood what was against them, and they hired Kihei Nasu. He was educated at Cornell College, not Cornell on the East Coast, but in Ohio, had impeccable English. So they would send him regularly to Sacramento to lobby against legislation that would target Japanese. And I want to read you something that he had written in his testimony. Let's see. Okay, so the thing was, about one third of the fishermen, this is statewide, were Japanese, but there's also Italians and Austrians, Yugoslavians, and of this, there was only 1% Americans, however you want to categorize them, non-immigrants who were in fishing, only 1%. But, so he wrote, of this 99%, probably 1/3 are Japanese. If it be true that the American fishermen are being driven from the industry, why blame the 1,000 Japanese exclusively and omit the other foreigners who constitute 2/3 of the whole industry? If the Japanese, who are 1/3 of the fishermen, are driving out American fishermen, but do not only not drive out the other foreign fishermen, but are actually outnumbered 2-to-1 by them, the statement of Senator Phelan seems so illogical that it should fall of its own weight. And he was just saying that the fishing is like a hard business. It's actually, when I was doing research for the project, I think to this day it's one of the most dangerous occupations out there. Many people lost their lives while they were fishing. So when I saw this is actually, I found Kihei Nasu's testimony in this tattered book at the LA Public Library. And I was just wondering, who is this guy? And I would ask the Terminal Islanders, do you know Kihei Nasu? Do you know him? And nobody knew that name Nasu, So what did I do? I went to social media. And I had put out things like, any Terminal Islanders out there, anybody? And then someone I knew emailed me and said, my grandfather was in Terminal Island and his name was Kihei Nasu. So that's how I got all these photographs. And what had happened was Mr. Nasu, he kind of sensed things are not going to be good for my 5 children, or I think at least 2 of them were born in Terminal Island, for my 5 children in this country, so we have to go back to Japan. So they did. So that's why the present-day Terminal Islanders were unaware of him. After Mr. Nasu left, another person was hired to represent the Islanders in Sacramento, and he was a Japanese immigrant who had gone to Stanford. my alma mater. So, you know, they knew that they had to fight against this legislation. So this, for me, was kind of opened my eyes, like, these aren't just like a rambunctious group of fishermen and their families. These are people who, I mean, they were successful, they made money, but they also knew what they had to do to continue their future livelihood. These are more photos from the Nasu. There was sand everywhere, by the way. And it's kind of unusual that all these kids are wearing shoes because many of them were barefoot. And some of the kids, you know, did not have shoes to wear. What was interesting too is like perception of terminal islanders. You know, within even the Japanese American community, it's like, is this a ghetto? You know, because people on the mainland would visit terminal island, it smelled bad, okay? They're processing fish. And everybody is living in very cramped areas. And they're going, this is a ghetto. But then when you talk to the terminal islanders, one person, Charlie Hamasaki, and we've lost him, but he was such a character, and he just says, this is an enchanted island, you know, and he just loved it. And there is something, just because terminal islanders, their descendants still gather today. That's, you know, we don't have, there was a big community in Boyle Heights, there was a big community in Going. We don't have that same kind of socializing that still happens. So I think there is something to what Charlie had to say. So this kind of, so what the canneries did was they would build housing for their laborers. So it was not only the fishermen, but oftentimes the wives were the ones that worked in the canneries on the line. So, but this will give you a sense of how close all the housing was in Fish Harbor. And this too, this is kind of like when people go, oh, it's so cramped. And this map, you can't really see it that well, but if you get the book, you can. But there was Terminal Islanders at one of their reunions. This was made in 2006, and it's so cute because they list like 6 people. So they just sat and they just remembered like what families lived in all these little houses. And I think so that's why the community is so close. It's kind of like this huge extended family. What's really cute too is the name of the streets. We have Tuna Street, they have Cannery Street, you know, and many of these streets are kind of misspelled. They have Barracuda with a K, you know, and there's, instead of albacore, there's albicore. And if you go to the spot in Terminal Island, actually there's still some of these streets still exist. So yeah, so many times 2 households may share like a bathroom. There was a big, what we call a furo or bathtub, you know, they would use wood to warm. And you know, anyone, I bet a lot of you have gone to Japan, so you clean yourself outside of getting into the water, right? And then you soak in the hot tub, and that's what these fishermen were doing after a hard day, or maybe they were gone to sea for maybe weeks on end, and they would come and enjoy a hot bath. This will show you a little bit of what I was talking about, the chummy with the long bamboo lines. It's a little bit, it's not a totally clear image because this was taken from a video. And then on the right side is more the traditional, like, purse signing. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing that, but so they would let the net into the ocean, and they would have cork around it, and the fish would come into the nets, and then they would, like a, the way you would tighten a purse with they would tighten and catch the fish in there. So things like sardines, you really needed the moon for that fluorescence. That's how they would know where to target their nets to get the sardines. When it was, when the moon was not out, that's when the fishermen would come and they would repair their nets as they're doing here. And many of them went into Little Tokyo, and what did they do there? They partied. They drank and did these things. So the mainlanders, again, and they would look at these terminal islanders. First, their skin is dark because they're out in the sun, and their language is different, slightly different, because a lot of them are from the Wakayama area. They have this Wakayama dialect, but then they almost created their own language right there, in Fish Harbor. And, when you do fishing, you can't be very polite. Your life is, maybe something's, a wave is coming at you or something's coming at you, and they would use kind of rough language. They would create, like plural in Japanese is ra, and what they would do is they would say mira, yura. So it's like me, the English me, and they put ra on it, so that became we, and then you and ra became, the plural you. So they were creating their own language. So they would go into Little Tokyo with their own language and doing all these things. So they had kind of this reputation that I feel was not, accurate, but I don't think the mainlanders really knew what the fishermen were going through. So what kind of changed things a little bit were the, women that started to come. There was a gentleman's agreement that during Teddy Roosevelt's presidential term. And Teddy Roosevelt, he was kind of pro-Japan in some ways. So he, the Chinese, they really went through very harsh, laws, exclusion laws. And I think Teddy was trying to compromise a bit. They still limited Japanese immigration, but they were saying, okay, you could maybe bring family members over. So when they were like, that's what started this whole picture bride movement, where the men here would receive photos of women, in their hometowns, and there was like an arranged marriage, and these women would come. And with, as we call Issei, first generation women arrived, that's when families became established in, throughout the United States in Japanese American communities, but on Terminal Island. And that gave the community a little more stability as well. The one on the right is, there were different businesses that were also established in Fish Harbor as well. This is kind of hard to see, but I like this photo. This is like a chandlery store, stores that provided things for boats, and this is one photo. You can't really tell from a distance, but I think there's Yugoslavians. This is where there was interactions with other ethnicities that kind of happened in these kind of establishments. And in Fish Harbor, actually, there were two competing chandlery stores right next to each other. I think there was even a door connecting. So if they couldn't, if Mr. Hamasaki or whatever said, oh, he couldn't find something for someone, he would go, oh, just go next door, and they might have it for you. So even though there were competitors, there was some kind of camaraderie between these kind of businesses. These are photos of the women that worked on the line, the canning line at the canneries. So each each cannery had a different horn or whistle. So as these fresh fish arrived to Fish Harbor, a cannery would emit a certain horn, and you knew, oh, that's my cannery that I work for. And these women would, get into their rubber boots, covered their hair, and they would have to rush over to the cannery. And because of all these units were so close to each other, you might tell your neighbor, you might have 3 kids, 4 kids. It's like, can you watch the kids? I'm gonna go next door. I'm gonna go work in the cannery. So there was a lot of reciprocity, a lot of mutual aid that happened on the Fish Harbor. So there were a couple of elementary schools on Terminal Island, and one of them was Fish Harbor. This public school was primarily Japanese kids. There was a few but Japanese American children. The photo on the left is of Mildred Obar Wallitzer, and she was a teacher, a very beloved teacher, and she later became a principal. Even though she had a house, a place to live in San Pedro, oftentimes she would sleep in a cot in the elementary school. She would raise money to get shoes for the children. And the Terminal Islanders adored her so much that they raised $4,000, which is a lot of money in the 1930s, for Mildred to go to take a tour of Japan. And they also sent her to their hometown of Wakayama. So that's how much they adored her. Mildred got married. She had no children of her own, but unfortunately she was diagnosed with cancer and died in the 30s, I believe. And so they had this huge funeral for her, and they renamed the school after her. So that's how much she was loved. And they would have different Japanese festivals, and that's what's represented in these photos. By the way, a lot of these photos we got from a scrapbook that a teacher, they didn't have hardly any Japanese American teachers, but I think her name was Gomez. She had donated a scrapbook to Harbor College. And so we were able to take our computers to Harbor College and scan all these images, which was very generous of them. Kendo, they had a lot of martial arts on Terminal Island too. Kendo is, this might remind you of Shogun or something, but they do with wood sticks. So when I'm going to jump to, the removal of Pearl Harbor, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, among the first to be targeted were instructors of Japanese school, as well as instructors of martial arts, and especially something like Kendo. But as you can see, they're just, with the larger photo, they have balloons that are on their helmets, and they were supposed to target that to pop it. And then you see girls also did Kendo as well. And this is a photo, so baseball, sports in general was very popular in Terminal Island. This is the San Pedro Skippers, and they were very good. They were excellent, and in fact, the fishermen, when they were in their boats, and they would kind of talk to each other when they were close, if their signals could connect, they would talk to each other. How are the Skippers doing? And just like we would talk about how are the Dodgers doing, and this was their home team, and they were very proud of them. They competed against, I think, primarily other Japanese American teams throughout California. This is a photo of just showing you more the terminal. The smaller one is of a Russian, I think this was like, show your heritage, you know, kind of event. And there was some Russian families that were in Fish Harbor, and the Russian family learned, these children learned Japanese, you know, but there were only very few among mostly Japanese Americans. And this larger photo is from the town of Terminal, which was more mixed and interracial. What was really interesting for me, in addition to Kihei Nasu, was religion on the island. And this is a Shinto shrine. It was called Daijungu, and it was one of the few Shinto shrines in California. There were more in Hawaii, but I don't know how many of you know religion in Japan, but Shinto is the national religion. And Buddhism is more known, and there's more Buddhist temples here in California and rest of America. Usually at the Shinto shrine, that's usually where you go for New Year's, and it's many of the weddings have this, they do the drinking of sake, which is actually more of a Shinto practice. And more the funerals in present-day Japan take place in Buddhist temples. So that's one kind of differential. But anyway, it was really interesting to see that there had been a Shinto shrine. There was some documentation at UCLA Special Collections. Some of it was in Japanese. It was an attorney who had done some work for Terminal Islanders had given his papers to UCLA, so I was trying to figure out like more of the history of this Shinto shrine. What they do is they enshrine like the soul, the kami of various individuals, and here they enshrined President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, and President George Washington. So he's enshrined here. And those two presidents have been enshrined in other Shinto shrines in America. So it just shows you the interesting thing about this very traditional Japanese religion, but acknowledging that they are American as well. What was also a big what was a larger presence was actually the Baptist church. Well, I should call it a mission, because this is how Terminal Island was viewed. It was like almost viewed like a foreign country, because it was not, you know, it was like missionaries went to Terminal Island. And the woman who's holding the child, her name is Virginia Swanson. She was a woman from Minnesota who was she was just moved by the story of Japanese immigrants, in Minnesota. And so she was, she wanted to serve Japanese immigrants, so she came to California. She went to Terminal Island, and she was an advocate for Japanese Americans during the removal period after Pearl Harbor, and she eventually married a Japanese immigrant man, and they served in the ministry together. Okay, so Pearl Harbor, the day, this was, I think, the night of December 7th. So these streets that were filled with people, usually totally empty. With Terminal Island, I think it's unique and also tragic, and people had to go through a lot more than other parts of California. Of course, it's by the water, so there are people, the military as well as the FBI, they're concerned about, they've been surveilling a lot of these individuals because they are concerned of people being spies and all that kind of things. So after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, you had to take a ferry if you wanted to go like to San Pedro. There was no high school on Terminal Island, so they would have to take a ferry to the high school. And all of a sudden, they stopped the ferry service, and people didn't know what was going on. It was a Sunday, but people didn't know, they were afraid. They didn't know what was going on. And there were boats, that were coming in. They were close by the shore, and they were stopped by authorities, and people were wondering what, they didn't know what was happening. And of course the leaders, certain leaders were, like other parts of California, were picked up right away that evening, that day, maybe early, maybe the next day. So in that sense, it was not that different from other places. I think what was really tragic in terms of Terminal Island was on February 2nd, every Japanese fisherman was picked up, and they were taken to the immigration station. They're interrogated, and then they were sent off to the Department of Justice alien internment centers. And so one person like Charlie Hamasaki, he had come here when he was a baby, so he didn't even view himself as like an immigrant, but he had to go to the Dakotas. And these are people who don't have warm clothing, and all of a sudden, they're being sent to all these way out places. The photo on the bottom is, there was a Department of Justice camp in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And then what's kind of interesting about these group of men is one has Skippers. Remember what Skippers? The baseball has a T-shirt, and I think there might be someone with the yogore. So people in Japanese, there's this term called yogore, which means dirty ones. And that's what the mainlanders would sometimes call, in an insulting way, the Terminal Islanders. But the Terminal Islanders, because they had a sense of humor, they kind of adopted that, and they kind of said, "Oh, I'm a yogore," So even when many of them went to Manzanar, and they even formed like athletic groups, and they called themselves the yogores. So these are men that were picked up on February 2nd. I think so. Just imagine, you saw that community there, in Fish Harbor, and all the patriarchs are gone. So it leaves the women and the children, and some had adult children. Teenage, older adult children, but they're like trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What's happening? And they didn't know where their patriarchs were being sent. So it was a big question mark. And then at the end of February, I think it was February 27th, they get a notice that, and this is everybody on the island, even the non-Japanese, they get they get orders that they have to leave the island because the military is going to take over. So it's another, forced, they have to leave and move. This is the photo. This is kind of odd because you would think one of the first people that they would pick up is the Shinto priest, and this is Reverend Miyoshi, and he's taking down the Shinto shrine. This gentleman was really interesting because he went through Hawaii. He was an actor. He was a divorced single man of a teenage girl, and so he had all these like different. He also worked at a restaurant, but he also ran the Shinto shrine. So when I was trying to figure out, like, how did this guy support the shrine? Like, because it wasn't like people were going to services. And then some of the people that I interviewed, and luckily, I did the interviews during the time that there were still some Terminal Islanders alive and had memories. And one of them told me that when her father went out fishing, they would call the Reverend Miyoshi to come, and he would say a blessing over the father so that he would return safely. And of course, the family probably gave the Reverend some money. So that's kind of how he got some income going. But if you can see, maybe people in the front, so who's enshrined, you could see, you know, there's Lincoln and George Washington right there. But for some reason, Reverend Miyoshi was not picked, he was not among the people picked up around December 7th. So I don't know if the FBI just didn't really understand what this Daijingu place was. I'm not quite sure. So again, you know, just this shot is just so moving of all the things that, you know, the matriarchs and their children had to pull together to leave the island. So after people left, this is a police officer, you know, everything's empty, and all these barracks were raised soon after to make room because there was a military presence here now as well. So I think this might be my last slide. Okay, so so that was kind of the end of Terminal Island, or was it? Because like I said, the Terminal Islanders still get together. And I really think the reason they do is, and they have this sense of resilience, which I really have needed sometimes in my life. And they have a sense of joy and a sense of family. And I think those things have sustained them. And that has been passed down to their children and grandchildren. And that's why they like to hang out at least 2 times a year. And this monument on the bottom is one, it's not right at the spot of Fish Harbor. I believe it's a little bit north. But it's a really wonderful monument. There's a couple of fishermen. They wanted to first put 1 fisherman in there, but the Terminal Islanders say, no, we need more than 1. And there's some artwork by Terminal Yukio Tatsumi, you know, there as well. And yeah, so it's, even though, like, you know, it's gone, there's still a pool, you know, of people to remember. Some parts of, what was supposed to be a temporary exhibit at the Maritime Museum is now a permanent exhibit, and it kind of reflects what is in this particular book. So that's about it.
That's Reg.
Where did he go? Oh.
I want to put some lights up a little bit so we
Oh,
can see
okay,
you a little
okay.
better for some questions and answers.
Good.
I'll take care of this.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Yes, I'm interested in Charles Lummis and his little coterie who were there on Terminal Island. What was that like? And did they coexist happily with the Japanese fishermen?
It was prior. They were there prior to the fishermen.
Oh, they were.
Mm-hmm. So that was they were gone by 1917, and that's when the Fish Harbor was. So it's kind of like a chronology of the island. Yeah.
And what is on Terminal Island right now?
The federal prison. And a lot of, yeah, it's, that particular Fish Harbor area is pretty much abandoned buildings. There's a couple of original buildings there, but I don't know, we heard some rumors that there might be plans to raise a lot of those buildings. So I don't know what the city's planning there. Yes,
Is there any kind of historical preservation movement about any of the buildings or sites?
there's a little, but it's not that strong right now. But then I think if they do talk about, you know, eliminating the buildings, maybe, you know, there might be some pushback. There's certainly, I don't know about the terminal islanders themselves, if they would, I'm not sure if they would be on the forefront of that, you know, campaign. But, yeah, we're kind of keeping an eye on it and just seeing, yeah. Yes, Bill?
Was there census information from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s?
Yes. Mhm. Yeah, there's census information, and I'm trying to think of whether there are kind of materials that we came across. I will say this, a lot of the information came from the terminal islanders themselves, because it seemed like they did kind of like their own census, yeah.
Do they still have reunions or?
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
Annually or?
2 times a year.
Oh, where does that happen?
There's a park in Buena Park, and you could like Google it, all are invited. There's one in June, and they usually have something at a hotel in January. So they're still, and they're very open, and they welcome all people to check it out.
So these would be second, third, fourth generation?
Yeah, you know, when we did our program in Gardena, there were a few people that had lived in Fish Harbor. One was like 83, so he was baby, you know, he's pretty young. And there was a woman, right, Elliot, we just, at our event, unfortunately, she just passed away, but we did have someone in her who was 100, 100 years old, and she, came for one of our book events. But yeah, but they're just, it's so fascinating to me how the second generation, they're really connected to one another, you know, and it's so interesting because they themselves did not live on Terminal Island, but something knits them together. Oh, I do have to say this too, something about the Terminal Island spirit, because after World War II, there were still laws that said Japanese could not fish. It was a game from the Department of Fish and Game said Japanese could not fish, and one of the Terminal Islanders, he took a case up to the Supreme Court and was able to reverse it. So it just, again, kind of shows you that these are not just, you know, raunchy fishermen, you know, they're fighters and they know what they have to do.
We have a question in the back, and then we'll do one here.
Okay, yes.
Jen?
So when our government rounded them up and put them in prison, was there any attempt to keep the fishing continuing with other populations?
Yeah.
And the canneries open?
Yeah. So there were Filipinos
Uh-huh.
were involved, some Filipinos were already working in the canneries. And there were other people, there were Europeans, Americans working in the canneries too. So, so there was, I think perhaps like during the height of the war, that wasn't really going on, but, you know, shortly, you know, after the war ceased, and some Japanese Americans did, you know, continue fishing, but very few, yeah.
What exactly did the government do with the land after they evicted the Japanese?
I think some of it was used for military purposes, like exercises and that kind of thing, but they just,
So it sounded like they really didn't really have any real purpose to use it. It was just to evict them, and then basically do nothing with it.
Well, I think maybe they were looking at it for security purposes or something, to that. I don't know, but that's what they did, yeah.
We have one more question in the back.
Naomi, correct me if I'm wrong, but somehow I've heard that the houses that they were living in, they had an option to buy them. So they were purchasing from the canneries who owned the houses.
They paid rent.
Oh, but they were. they
I
didn't have
do not
mortgage?
believe, I don't think that they were purchasing.
So
the
maybe
building
that's
itself.
misinformation, Cause I kinda heard that,
you know.
when they took them back and raised them,
Mhm.
they couldn't pay their mortgage anymore because all their funds were frozen, and so they lost them. But your information is new to me, that they were used for government purpose, the land was used for government purposes.
Yeah. I have not heard that, Cindy. I mean, I could be wrong, but
No,
I'm
no,
pretty sure. I mean, that happened in other places,
Yeah.
for sure.
I
That
think,
people could not pay their property
yeah,
tax.
we went on a field trip to Terminal Island
Oh,
with
okay.
DHS, and our tour guides were telling us that. But again, everybody's story is their truth. So I'm not really sure, I was just trying to clarify with you.
I'm
You didn't
not-
find any of that.
I'm not aware of that, but I could be, and there were different canneries, maybe there was a certain agreement of this
Yeah.
one cannery with, so I'm not aware of that, but I just heard that, they had to pay rent to that particular cannery, which kind of makes sense, right? From a business perspective, I think the canneries would probably not want to sell it, because they want, there's no guarantee that that person's gonna continue to work for the cannery. I don't know. Again, I could be wrong. I'm always learning.
We'll take one last question. Elizabeth?
Oh.
Was there another one?
One.
It's you.
Oh, good. I'm wondering whether when they returned from their internship, if they came to Little Tokyo, and I just read this morning, the National Trust names
Yes.
11 most endangered places in the country. And they just have announced that Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, is one of the 11 most endangered places. And that's separate from what you're talking about. But it made me wonder whether the people we saw in your presentation came back to Little Tokyo.
Well, we have some members of the Little Tokyo Historical Society right
With us
there.
tonight, yes.
Yeah, David and Cindy.
David is more senior than I am. Yes.
They're actually, this kind of segues, we're going to do a giveaway, because one of the books, this is our early paperback, this is going to be available in paperback in July, but this is a book, Evergreen, and it talks about the resettlement, people's return to Little Tokyo, actually, and Boyle Heights and Burbank, which was also, all those locations had like housing, temporary housing. Little Tokyo, there were, people were like living in hotels as a short-term option, and some temples had, and churches, they had hostels that people, so among them could be terminal islands. I've learned that most of them have kind of settled kind of in the Long Beach area, because that's, once you're close to the ocean, you kind of want to stay close to the ocean. Okay, so whose birthday? My birthday is on Mother's Day, falls on Mother's Day this year. So whose birthday, and it can't be after, is closest to next Sunday? Any May babies here? When's your birthday?
58.
I hate to, it's tomorrow.
Happy birthday!
Oh, no! All right, I'll re-gift this with another question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so excited to read this. Not excited to get another year older, but thank you. And a big round of applause and thank you for our speakers. And a big thank you to Angel City Press our presenting co-partner in most of our Southern California programs. The book is available in the back of the room. If you haven't gotten a copy of the book and would like to get a copy, you can see Elliot in the back. And Naomi is also signing copies of the book, so now would be a great time to acquire one of those. Please join us for our next book club program, which is Monday, May 13th at 5 o'clock. This is a virtual program on Zoom. It is not in person, but it is Southern California themed. The title is Sand Rush, the Revival of the Beach in 20th Century Los Angeles, on Zoom on Monday, May 13th. You can register for that program or any book club program by going online to bccbooks.org/programs, or you can click the link in one of the emails that you might be getting from the book club now. Or you can call me or email me. I'm kevin@bccbooks.org, and I can register you for any program. So thanks everyone for joining us. Check out a copy of the book in the back and get it signed, and we look forward to seeing you again here at a book club program in Southern California. Thank you.